Podcast 46 comes to you from the Wiggly sofa in Lower Blakemore, Herefordshire, and I'm Heather from Wiggly Wigglers.
And I'm Richard from Wiggly Wigglers.
And I'm Farmer Phil.
And we are very, very, very pleased as punch, to invite along Roger. Hello, Roger.
Hello.
And he has been our temp at Wiggly Wigglers for the past
4 weeks, I think it is. It seems like longer. Not in a bad way.
I thought temps wore short skirts and had blonde hair. What happened?
I can do that for you if you'd like.
It was quite funny because the first day he came really smart, all dressed up in a suit, and the day after he came in shorts and a t-shirt. Anyway, we're going to hear from Roger because he's been our best temp ever.
He has, hasn't he?
And we're going to let Roger turn the tables and host a bit of the podcast to ask us questions. But the most important thing of the day is it's Rachel's birthday.
Happy birthday, Rach.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday,
What a good
Rach.
old bird. She doesn't look bad for 46, does she?
She's pretty good, you know.
She's in Barcelona and she won't tell us where she's staying, so we can't organise a surprise, so there we
Might have
are.
been a shrewd move on her part.
Yeah.
I did manage to give her a big slobbering kiss before she left.
Oh dear.
Brave man.
Yeah.
Oh dear me.
Yeah.
Never mind.
All right.
Farmer Phil's only here for a very short period of time because he's off on his combine. There's a few things that we need to go through with him. It's very bad news from Phil. Richard, that's not funny. Philip, Farmer Phil, how did the hedge competition that you entered go this year?
They accepted my entry,
Yes.
but that's about as far as it went, I'm afraid.
You seem to have a nice time with the judge.
I do. I get on very well with the judge, and I've got no issues with the judge. But I think that there were two possibilities. If we take the positive line, the competition was very hot, and therefore that's good for the hedgerows of Herefordshire.
You mean there's better hedges about?
Well, there are other people who've got good hedges.
And the alternative?
That he didn't agree with how I manage my hedges.
Rich.
You see, it's interesting, Phil.
Do you know him,
I've been
Rich?
sat here smirking away, and Phil said, "What are you smirking about, Richard?" I think he quietly knows why I've been smirking, because we've been chuckling about the hedge thing this morning. Since our hedge debate, really the hedge debate has cropped up all the time.
Ah, funny. Propped up.
Ever since episode 16, wasn't it? I think
Yeah.
we were waxing lyrical about all things hedge-like. Phil, I think you might be, the soldier that's marching out of step, because whilst you really like your hedges and you think that they are the best thing since sliced bread, everybody that knows what they're talking about disagrees with your management strategy.
Sweeping statement number one.
Oh, I say. Roger, you might have to be a referee.
English nature, nature trust, leaf. Anybody that's kind of thinking about conserving hedges for wildlife, also looking at conserving hedges for practical purposes, which you obviously do. I mean, I'm trying not to smirk and be slightly cocky over the whole hedge scenario, but I'm wondering, if you didn't get into the next section of this competition, and if everybody, every organisations like English Nature and the Nature Trusts and Leaf and pretty much everyone that is aware of the significance of hedges and is also aware of the decline in lots and lots of invertebrates because of hedge management since the mid-1940s, and yet you still think that your management strategy is the best, I'm just wondering how, other than through sheer belligerence, you can come up to that conclusion.
Is that a knockout blow, Phil? I feel that he's actually trying for a maul.
Well, I just
rather
take the
than
view
an actual,
that he has
boxing.
he's waited some time for his diatribe,
Yeah.
and there we have it.
Yeah.
The fact that we didn't reach the final, I am guessing, because I don't know, that it is those people who have adopted the environmental schemes, so they've got wide wildflower margins and things like that go with the hedges, that they have effectively put more effort into the management of the hedge and its surrounding environment. I'm guessing. In conversation with the judge, Tony agreed with my management principles. He also agreed that the latest DEFRA rules had damaged the hedges. I think that, as always, and as I've always maintained, Rich, that the management of hedgerows should be a compromise that fits with the effective farming of the ground.
He's
And
back.
I
He's
do
back.
not agree
Well, where's the
with
compromise?
maintaining
I don't
farmland.
see where the compromise is.
The compromise is, Rich, that if farmland is going to produce food for you and I to eat, then it has to be farmed. And that the environmental benefits of hedges and their environs have to fit in. Now, that conflict is going to be a balance. You can't have fields and fields of wildflower meadows and eat your loaf of bread every day. It doesn't work.
You can't do that.
So there's a compromise.
There is
And
a
my
compromise.
compromise says that I'm going to produce food and I will manage my hedges for a healthy hedge to
It's not a
fit with
compromise,
that.
though, Phil.
It
A
is.
compromise would be either having reasonable strips of set aside along your hedgerow, so as you've got nice buffer zones for all sorts of mammalian and avian and invertebrate life to negotiate.
Rich, perhaps you could just remind me
So
as to
that would be. So
why...
the compromise would be to have some of those hedges managed in such a way that it accommodates wildlife. Your idea of a compromise is managing your hedges in the way that you want to manage them with little regard for wildlife.
Bring it on.
That is grossly,
for the whole period.
grossly
so
unfair.
the word
And
compromise is completely
I have to ask you
inappropriate.
two questions. What is the purpose of a hedge?
The purpose of a hedge is very much, I mean, it really, in many respects, it is in the eye of the beholder as well. Right? The purpose of a hedge for an environmentalist is
for the owner of the hedge.
and a person who is able to appreciate the natural history that the British Isles offers is to accommodate wildlife, is to provide habitat, fodder and forage
Absolute
for all sorts of different species of wildlife. Also, it serves to mark boundaries between fields.
And surely, being as that was the reason
Prior
that
to
it was
all this-
planted, that
prior
is
to
the
all that,
primary
you
reason
can't-
for its existence.
You could say that the reason the hedges are there is because farmers have put them there. But if
Well, nobody else did.
Absolutely. But what farmers did is cut down vast tracts of woodland. So these hedgerows are remnants. And
Sorry, mate.
you've cleared the land, and you've planted up with brilliant arable crops. And I know you do farm sympathetically. You've planted the land and you grow fantastic arable crops, good quality crops, which I can only appreciate the value of. I know they're great. However, the compromise is leaving those hedgerows and maintaining those hedgerows, having already cleared the scrub, taking away the woodland to grow your crops. That is the compromise.
Rich, you're
to manage
mixing
those-
up too many
To just
things.
have hedgerows there and cut them in a way, specifically for your own aesthetic appreciation isn't a compromise.
It is
I
an
appreciate
absolute
your
compromise.
perspective.
Well, I'm going to have to cut into it. Phil, I mean, you've just had hours of diatribe, of, as I call it, hippie environmentalism after the Tim Smith interview.
Yeah, no, it's
and
not
I
hippie
just
Smith
have to give him a
environmentalism.
chance to
Hippie-
say...
Hippie Smith
what-
environmentalism.
I have to give him a chance to say, why are your hedges any good and what has happened to your hedges since you've had this issue with the government cross-compliance? And then we're ending it there because you two will have to have a fight another day because what have you done? You've hijacked this podcast with your row again, haven't you? Well, we're moving on, Chubby. Phil.
I've got two comments to make. The reason that I'm upset with the government is that the management of hedgerows against arable crops means that you have to keep the undergrowth down next to the hedge. Otherwise, it blots out the bottom of the hedge and the leaves don't grow on the bottom of the hedge.
Yeah.
In a grazed scenario, the livestock will do that, so the management's different. That's my point. The rubbish has grown up the hedge and it has killed the bottom of the hedge. I'm very depressed about that. I would normally have sprayed out that little strip. It's good for birds, it's good for everything, and it works, and Rich can't argue with it. The other thing I'd just like to say quickly in response
I can't
to
argue
Rich's...
with that. I can't argue with that.
I know
But
you
not
can,
today.
but you're not
you
going
enjoy your
to.
second point, but I could argue with that
But
because there's lots
I've
of
just got
points
one
I could
other
make.
point, that when Rich first came here, he surveyed our farm and said that this was a vast area of sub-Saharan monoculture and that I had devastated the wildlife. Well, he had a family day the other day and they went pond dipping and he found everything in that new pond that we dug and it just appeared. So despite my best efforts to kill everything, he found a whole plethora of quite rare beasties, bugs, newts and what have you, and they just appeared.
I've got one last opportunity. I want you to tell him why your hedges are so good.
The reason my hedges are so good is because they are much bigger in volume and height than anybody else's or most other people's, and they provide a good boundary to the fence. They are a good barrier, but they also provide an excellent environment for all the wildlife that you are on about.
Ping! And that's the end of round 1.
Yeah, but how am I going to remember my retorts and my response to those?
If you're not bright enough to
points
remember
that
your own
Phil
argument, that's your
has
look.
chosen to make for next week.
As Radio Wyvern's
Can we just carry on?
As Radio Wyvern's journalist once said to me,
That's unfair. You're
you
biased.
have to remember.
You love him.
Well, you're all right.
I love you, Rich.
And Phil's my mate, but I still feel as though I have more points to make.
Just a minute. As the Radio Wyvern journalist said to me, you have to remember how much airtime you've got. And you, Richard, have waffled, and I'm cutting you off. So over to Michael for the music. Wow, Rog, what do you think of that, old boy?
That was interesting.
Why
A little
were you-
scary, but
Yeah, why were you running out of the door?
yes, I was going to get my mum.
Yeah, so you'll get your mum, won't you, Rich?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to get my mum to tell Phil off.
Right, moving on. We'll have to come back on that battle because Richard feels completely marginalised and just all alone in this.
Well, I'm at a disadvantage, aren't I?
I gave you a chance.
And I've got a couple of points to make that I'd
get
like to make
over
that we
it.
won't go into now because you're going to tell me off and play the music again.
I will. So we will
Set out.
have part 55 of the hedgerow row next week.
Okay.
Moving on to Farmer Phil and his seed trial. Now this is the corker. We've got all different seeds here from all different companies to find out if ours was working okay and our packaging, and we learnt an awful lot from it. And so we got identical seed feeders and we set them up on the Wiggly balcony and we filled them with all the different seeds with the idea of which the birds would prefer, just to see for ourselves. And Jodie's point was relevant. Would they go for the one nearest the tree? And that was okay until Phil the gardener came along and he fills the seed feeders up, so he filled them all up with Wiggly seeds. So next week we're going to start again. But we all, didn't we, Rog and Rich, we all got round and had a look at this seed and called for Farmer Phil to tell us which he thought were good. And he came up with how to actually find out whether or not people were paying money for dirt.
Yeah.
So can you explain it, Phil?
Yeah,
What to look for?
basically I've got in front of me, whatever it is, 6 or 8 different roughly comparable mixes. And obviously the first thing you can do is just do a visual comparison, what looks nice, what looks varied and so on. And obviously some of them have got a much higher percentage of sunflowers because they're very visual. Some of them look to have got a very high percentage of what I could only describe as broken cereals. They may be pinhead oats, they may be cereal cleanings, but they're effectively, I think what's going on is that things like sunflowers are relatively inexpensive, and certainly cereals are inexpensive, so that the more of those sort of elements that you have in a mix, the less expensive it's likely to be.
Right.
And then,
I've just opened one, that crackly noise.
having got amongst them visually, you then sort of get some in the palm of your hand and sort of sift through it and try and identify what you think you've got in there. And one thing which is quite interesting is if you get some in the palm of your hand and then let it run off your hand slowly, the last thing that's left on your hand is the dirt, all the bits of dust and the little particles of rubbish.
Yeah.
And that was very revealing because that instantly ruled out all but 3 of the samples.
Right.
That all the others, particularly the ones with the cereal-based broken bits of cereal and this, that and the other in them, they'd all got quite a high quantity of dirt and dust,
Oh, look at that one.
husk and
Filthy.
crud. So that was quite an interesting test. And then I was left with 3, which although different, they looked to be roughly comparable. They got a little bit of colour to them, they got a lot of variety in terms of what was in them, and it looked to be roughly balanced.
Right.
And I'm pleased to say that Wiggly seed was one of them, so I was quite pleased with that.
Yeah.
I'd like you to know that he didn't know which was which.
No, it was, although I could identify the Wiggly seed instantly, because obviously it was the only one with indigo wheat in it.
Right,
But
right.
wheat is a filler, really, isn't it?
It is a filler, and that's really what I'm getting at, is that the cost of these seed mixes really comes down to the cheaper elements and how much of those are in them. So the sunflowers and the wheat would be among the cheapest elements, and they tend to be the elements that people will put more in to try and increase their
Yeah,
weight.
So
but-
the sunflowers are one of the cheapest elements then?
They're one of the cheaper elements,
Right,
certainly.
right.
Things
Yeah, but-
like sunflower hearts are about 3 times the cost of actual sunflowers. So if you see a mix with sunflower hearts in it,
Right.
that's likely to be more expensive. Canary seed is quite expensive, and some of the smaller seeds are quite expensive.
So the sunflower heart, is that because they have to go through a process to take the husks off then?
Yeah.
Right.
But you see, the thing is, though, that I would have thought that. I mean, when you go to a garage, often you'll see a seed mix that is predominantly wheat
Yeah.
and therefore less expensive. But this one, I won't name whose it is one of the worst samples that we've got. And this is actually £1.50 a kilo. So that's 50% more than most other people's seed mixes.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily mean if you've used cheap ingredients that you're going to get cheap seed, because this one's one of the worst and it's the most expensive.
Also, I think variety is the spice of life. If you look at the mixes that we've sort of said that we don't like much, they've got much less variety in them. The ones that we like have got lots of different ingredients. And birds on the whole, and the exception I would have to say are probably goldfinches and niger seed, because that's all they seem to like and they'll really go after it. But
Right.
if you want a variety of birds on your bird table, it seems logical to me to have a mix with lots of different ingredients in it, and then different birds will pick out the bits they like, and that seems sense to me.
Yeah.
You looked
Can-
at this, Rod.
Well, I'm very interested in this whole debate. I've been very new to this, but what I will ask is, in the sort of world of aesthetics that we live in nowadays, obviously I'm looking at the Wiggly seed now, and it is very bright and very colourful. Does one really think, I mean, are the birds going to make that much of a difference
Yeah.
between something that's very bright and colourful that we like the look of, and perhaps something that's got dust on and stuff? The customers, as it were, the birds, do they actually care?
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
And we'll tell you that once we've done the trial, I think.
Right, yes, of course, because we haven't done the trial yet.
Oh, we can tell you that when
I
we're
think
here.
that's a very good question, but I think you have to add to that although the bird is the customer, and you're dead right, the one who's paying wants value for money.
Right.
And my point is that if you're being sold cheap ingredients at an inflated price, you're not getting value for
No,
money.
absolutely.
If you have cheap ingredients at the correct price,
Then
fair
that's
enough, you're probably
fair,
dead
yeah.
right. My view is if you're getting value for money,
Then that's what you're after, yeah.
that's where you're at.
Right, we'll finish this now, but just before we do, what's the difference? Because this one is a very expensive seed,
Well-
and this one is...
It would be, I guess, inappropriate to say where they've come from, but there is a massive difference between those. And the one that you've got on your right-hand side that Phil's about to comment on is very expensive. It's considerably more expensive than Wiggly seed.
Yeah, it's £1.50 a kilo.
If you look at this sample, there are whole wheat grains, just normal run-of-the-mill wheat. A lot of these little bits of shrapnel, I think, are pinhead oats, which is an oatmeal, which is, not terribly expensive. The birds probably quite like it, but it does tend to make it dusty because they're smashed up effectively.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of canary in it, and there's a little bit of cut maize in it, and perhaps a small fraction of millet. Beyond that, I can't see much else in that other than the odd sunflower. And obviously in the Wiggly seed, which you've got in the other hand, there's a whole variety of things: safflower, dari, rape, canary, millet. There's indigo wheat, which is a much higher protein than normal wheat, which would benefit those
What's that
birds
one?
that like it.
Right.
Purple
There are
one.
striped sunflowers as
Or
well
as
as
Michael
black
says, the
sunflowers.
brown one.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of cut maize, so that there's a much greater variety, and it's clean. You only buy seed there. If you run that seed off your hand, you're left with very little in terms
If I
of
did tip it.
crud.
What about that stuff that we picked up at the local garage?
Well,
Because
there
that
is
had got weevils in it.
weevils.
Or whatever they were. What was it?
There is a trade in something called cleaning tail, so that when seed crops are cleaned, there is the fraction that you clean out.
Right.
And you can get fractions of that, and there is a trade in that for birdseed, but it is obviously very cheap. It is waste. So it makes a very good filler if you are so inclined. We don't use it because we don't believe in it. But it comes down to value for money. If you look at what you're getting and you perceive it to be value for money, fine.
Well, the trial goes on.
Interesting stuff.
We've let the birds eat the wiggly seed this week. And we've had a word with Gardener Phil. And we'll try it again. Question for you both. This is from Samantha Evans. Hello, we've been feeding badgers in our garden for at least a year now, but we've recently received concerned comments from neighbours about the risk of TB to our children. Is this really something we should be worried about? Our children are 3 and 6, and that's from Samantha Evans. Quick answer?
Well, I'll let Phil answer this, because in actual fact I did answer it, but then I spoke to Phil before I'd answered it, so Phil should answer this.
I think absolutely not, beyond the normal hygiene that children playing out in the garden, that you wash your hands before you eat and so on. But the reason that cattle get TB from badgers is because they eat the grass, and the badgers contaminate the grass with TB. It's quite a difficult disease to catch.
But our TB expert, Melanie, it's a different strain.
It is a different strain, but you can get it. Years ago, when we had TB as humans, we got it through unpasteurised milk. So the pasteurisation of milk sorted that issue. There is a minute risk, but I don't know of anybody who's ever caught it that way.
You can catch dreadful things off your cat if you really want.
Yeah, you could, absolutely.
Just before you go, can we have a quick harvest update? Yields, what you're doing, blah, blah.
Yields, very good. Nearly finished. Got about 70 acres of wheat to cut now. We're going well late at night. Get on.
It's been wet, hasn't it, though, recently?
It has. But, I mean, we've gone so well through the difficult crops, the grass seed and the peas. To get those in the dry, I can live with a little bit of wet wheat. That's not a problem. So, very happy. We're just currently bagging off our latest variety of red wheat.
Purple?
Well, purple then, if you like. Which hopefully will supersede indigo in due course. So that's quite interesting. We were very pleased with our trial plots of that. So that'll be good.
Just accurate report. What's the tonnage per whatever it is, etc. For our farming listeners? Hello, Anthony.
In terms of wheat yields, subject to the vagaries of the yield meter on the combine, but it's not usually bad. But wheat yields have varied between 3 3/4 tonnes per acre up to 5 tonnes an acre, which is exceptional. We are struggling to find room in the shed for that.
And what's your comment on the fact that all the millers are telling us that the price of bread is going up because of a bad harvest?
East of us, they have had reduced yields because they are drier than we are. Because our average rainfall is 38 inches, and say in Essex it's in the low 20 inches a year, that this year we gain because we have the climate that East Anglia would have had.
But we all know why the price is rising, and it's not the cost of the product.
Heather, you're not going to suggest that profiteering is going on amongst the big corporate millers, are you?
No, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. It's the price of oil, and it's the price of transport.
I think that might be an excuse.
There we are. Off you go, brum brum, old chap.
Bye for now.
Cheers, Phil.
We spoke about it earlier, but on Wednesday we had Family Day at Wiggly Wigglers, which is the first time ever that this has happened. Would you two, Richard and Rog, like to give the brief synopsis of what went on that day?
A brief synopsis, eh? Excellent. Well, I can tell you what happened.
Okay.
It was a good day, wasn't it, Rog?
It was a fantastic day, very good indeed.
And we kind of enlisted you, thinking that you might be really enthusiastic and enjoy the opportunity, and you did.
I did. I think it was absolutely excellent. Yeah, I didn't realise it was the first Family Day either. So you've told me that now, but yeah, it seemed to go down a storm with everybody who came.
We've had open days and we've done courses previously, but on a slightly smaller scale. Well, the open days are on a larger scale, but they're much more informal. Yeah. So they're not quite as well planned.
That was planned, was it?
Good Lord.
That was planned, yeah. But it was. I was really chuffed to bits on how the day went, because the weather might have been an inhibiting
It could have been
factor.
disaster. It was in the morning, wasn't it? Because it was just sheeting down with rain in the morning, and I thought, how's Rich going to manage this? Are we going to be inside a barn? And am I going to be bringing up buckets of water from the pond to do pond dipping? But fortunately, we didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
It really pulled itself together.
It works really well because I would have been inundated on my own. So by your help, it was fantastic because you were able to take half the group
down to do the pond dipping. Yes,
and catch some goodies. And what sort of stuff did you get? 'Cause there was a world of stuff.
There was just tons and tons of stuff. There was newts and great water boatmen, diving beetles, and a whole host of other things, which is my way of saying I wasn't exactly sure what these other things were. My knowledge was a tad sketchy, but we got a whole tub truck full of creatures, which the kids loved. Actually, the kids loved. I think the parents loved even more. They were sort of pushing kids out of the way to get those nets in, as you do. But yeah, great success.
Because you're a cookery teacher in real life.
I am, yes. And I did say to the assembled crowd that if I wasn't able to actually identify the creatures they got, I could probably knock up a quick recipe with them. But tell the Wiggly Wigglers that I'm not actually going to do that. That was a joke. Before I get in trouble from the RSPCA.
Great toasted crested.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, fantastic.
Smidging the garlic.
It's a shame that Phil's gone, really, in actual fact, because Phil did pay mention to the fact that there was a whole host of life in there. When I was rattling to him yesterday about how much life was in the pond, and he said about me making reference to the extensive arable layout that it is, a kind of semi-arid desert as far as birds of life is concerned. I think really it's not the fact that Phil's farmland doesn't have much life on it that makes all the difference in the garden. It's the fact that garden, really gives people a chance to see what's achievable in a garden, how much life you can draw into a garden, even if you do live in a semi-arid.
You can't leave it. Can you? You can't leave it.
I can hear the hedge debate.
Feedback. Has the day met your expectations? This is from a young chap, and he says, I didn't know cows will chase you when they have calves.
No, that was a bit of Phil. And Phil was on fire, He really was on fire.
That was brilliant. Very informative, and I'd like to say I'm going to get my family to listen to this because for years they've taken the mickey out of me and my slight nervousness of cows, and Farmer Phil has now proved me right that they are. Yeah. Well, they can be, homicidal maniacs by the sound of it if you get between them and their calves.
Yeah.
So I was right all along.
I think you might have overstated the fact that cows with calves will kill you. They do want to kill you. Bulls are fine, no problem at all. Cows, on the other hand, if they've got it in their mind to hurt you, they want to kill you. So people were backing off slightly after
tears were appearing at the kids' eyes.
On the mothers and creeping towards us. And I thought, Phil, you're doing really well. You keep everybody entertained. More often than not, you have to sort of walk in behind people to catch them when they're falling asleep when Phil talks for a minute. On this occasion, he's on for a new tactic: scare the living daylights out of people. It worked a treat. So it's interesting that Roger said he's not afraid of cows anymore.
He said it's okay that he is afraid of cows.
I'm afraid. I'm absolutely terrified of him now.
We got good marks for Richard and Roger on the Richard and Roger Day.
Good marks.
Excellent marks. Mostly 1s and 2s, in fact. Except there's one black mark, and that was the baby changing facilities.
Yes.
Oops.
Yeah, well, there isn't one, is there? But it's a working farm.
Yeah, but you and I planned this day.
How did you used to change Monty when he was little? It must have been... where did you used to... There was no baby changing facility, is there?
I don't remember that. I blanked it all from my mind. I do remember one night trying to get him to sleep. But over a 3-year period, that's about it, really.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. You call yourself a mother.
I don't know. I just don't know what happened there. Yeah. No. I'll have to move on because I simply don't know the answer. So we're going to move this podcast over to Roger now because Roger's been here for 3 weeks and he's given us lots of feedback on what we've been up to. He's a cookery teacher, as I've already said, and he's also interested in all things gardening and environment.
Absolutely, very much so, yes.
And so I'm going to hand this podcast now. The ship is going over to Roger because I'd like him to look at it from the point of view of a new listener and a new Wiggly and ask us what he will. So, over to Roger.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Heather. And can I start off by saying that I'd done a couple of interesting temp jobs. I won't go into what they were before I did this one. And so when I was asked to come over here, I was told it was a mail order catalogue, but I really had no idea as to the extent of what is actually going on at Wiggly Wigglers. And within 3 days, I was prepared to give up my teaching job and come and work here full time, much to the alarm of my wife. I think this is a fascinating company, led by someone who's obviously incredibly passionate about all things wiggly and gardening.
That's me.
That is Heather. Sorry, yes, I could just say.
Indeed.
And I have got one or two questions that I'd like to put to Heather and Richard. First to Heather is, Wiggly was nothing like I imagined it would be. And I'd like to ask you, when you started this, did you honestly think it would reach what it has become today? I mean, is this where you wanted to be, or has it exceeded your expectations?
Well, I never set off for it to be nothing much.
No.
Because otherwise you wouldn't make much difference at anything, I don't think. So there was always a big plan afoot.
Yeah.
But there was no real direction. So it was kind of a muddle through for many years. Well, it still is a bit of a muddle through, I must say. But the direction really came when we got the set of products and the mission, which was actually, we're sick of conventional gardening.
Yeah.
And once we found a way that you could actually enjoy gardening more,
Yeah.
then the mission is there. So it's not exceeding my expectations, it's underplaying my expectations at the moment. But every day seems to be really good fun, which is really one of the missions that we're trying to achieve. Is that fair, Rich?
I think it's very fair, yeah. I mean, I know you said to me before, because you're very much, as I am, into more adventures. So developing things, you've obviously got the organic growth, and that's played a big part in the way Wigglers has grown over the last few years. But you have gone out now over recent years and very shrewdly employed me, for instance, to develop different areas of the business.
Yeah.
So to physically go out and develop and offer more opportunities to provide support and advice to people, gardeners, not necessarily gardeners, we kind of work with all sorts of people that are looking at ways of increasing biodiversity, sustaining rural communities, supporting local food production, all those kind of sensible initiatives that are so important for people in Britain.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, it's all something you're passionate about because you're a country girl.
I'm country girl.
But you have a good overview and you are able to see what's achievable, and the sky is the limit.
The thing that really excites me is getting together with somebody like Michael, who sat behind the table making this podcast, because there's all these people there with a talent that is incredible, and then somehow or other I get to be able to use that talent. I can't make this podcast. I don't know what Michael does, but to be able to implement it and use it is just so crunchy.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Richard. I don't know about moths and beetles, and I certainly don't know about gardening, but to be able to use his talent for the greater mission is just fabulous.
I think that's what it is, right. That's what makes Wigglies, because the people here, everybody, the team, everybody's kind of friends. Everybody gets on really well. Everybody likes one another. That's fairly key, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
For productivity as much as anything else. But it's because everyone fits their niche very well indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael is absolutely brilliant at what he does, and it would be difficult to find someone who's got that inclination towards design and IT, and who's able to contribute in many ways. Rachel, who is absolutely superb in the operations department and keeps everybody in their place. Sandra, who's got a clinical approach to all things financial. Joe and Alison and you, for a short period, are absolutely brilliant at customer relations and being able to give people the information they need when they ring up, but also to be able to talk to people, to be able to humour them when they're ringing up if they have a slight problem or something, and to be able not to get fed up with those situations, but to make the best of those situations for personal development as much as anything else. And we have the girls, Sylv and Ricky and Wendy and Noel, and all those
Anne
guys,
and Maggie,
and Maggie, and gosh, I hope I haven't missed anybody out. But they're all Anne, absolutely, and they're all completely geared around getting the stuff out there and doing so in as appropriate way as is physically possible.
And it works very well. But I would say,
don't forget Jodie, because she's
Jodie is probably the hardest physically working woman I've ever come across.
And I think this all combines together to form an excellent and very, I don't know if this is a word, unfaceless company, but this is not a faceless company that is here one day and gone the next. What you've got here is something really, really good. It should be an institution, Wiggly, I feel, in a good way.
Yes, I think it might be an institution.
I could see Heather in a straitjacket.
You've had to battle, let's face it, in a country where there is an obsession with lawns and very sterile gardens, of which I absolutely loathe. And in fact, where I used to live in Northamptonshire with my wife, we got on very well with the neighbours, but they did always think we were rather odd because we left our grass just that little bit longer to grow and the clover to grow, so you got more bumblebees and stuff. And people, it's very hard to get people away from that. You know, you don't need to have neat edges and everything cut very, very low and stuff. I mean, the Wiggly garden here, when I first saw it, I was absolutely bowled over. You can sit there, eat your lunch, and hear the incredible sounds, hundreds and hundreds, I mean, so much activity. Hundreds and hundreds of different insects going about their daily life, which you don't get in a lot of gardens because there's nothing really for them to actually get on and do.
You've been signing books, haven't you?
I feel I fucked up incredibly.
4 weeks and people are asking for a
4 weeks
signature.
and I'm already signing books. I'm doing some in Waterstones, which I haven't told Heather about next week.
Or Jenny.
Or Jenny, yeah.
That's right.
I felt very guilty about that. But Richard just got in straight away and signed it, so I thought, well, it's obviously okay. I'll blame him.
Good man.
Yes, indeed. And if we've got time, if you had the power, Heather, Richard, both of you, to actually make everyone in England do one thing in their garden that was going to improve the environment, what would it do?
Dig a pond, I would say.
I would get them to plant a native hedge. And the reason that I would do that is because I think that would get corridors of hedges. I think it would shut you up going on at farmers, which would be nice. And I think it would hide all those disgusting fences and lawns.
Yes.
So you wouldn't have to see them anymore because they'd be enclosed in a hedge.
Yeah.
And I would inspire them to go to gardenrant.com, which is Amy Stewart's blog, or she blogs with another bunch of gardeners.
Yeah.
And we're actually having Amy Stewart, who is a, world-famous writer.
She is, very renowned.
Yeah, she's coming on the podcast
next
in
week.
a couple of weeks. Oh, is it next week?
Yeah.
So I'd inspire them to go and have a read of Amy Stewart.
Well, if she needs me to sign that book as well, I'm quite happy to do that.
That's very generous.
We should say the reason that we were asked to sign the books is because the children that came along on the family day were so inspired by us that they wanted our little contribution.
Listen, no rules at Wiggly's, no blame, no rules.
No blame,
Move on. Thank you both, and thank you, Roger.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, you've been our best temp ever. The dulcet tones of Roger, putting people right on ants. It's been a joy to behold. And I hope you give up your cookery teaching and come and join us.
I think we'll see Roger again.
I think we will.
I sincerely hope so. Right, I've been given the honour and the pleasure now of going over to Monty and his Wiggly Wormcast.
The Wiggly Wormcast podcast by Monty, a weekly fact on worms.
Lumbricus terrestris have red blood with hemoglobin like us.
Thank you, Monty.
Thank you, Roger. We'll finish now with the exciting prospect of next week, Amy Stewart. She's written tons of books.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. She seems like a really enthusiastic yank, doesn't she?
Definitely.
So there should be some real spunky stuff from her, I think.
That again. Oh, God. Right, off we go. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Party poppers.
Party poppers.
You know, like DJs say, don't they? You know, like party poppers.
She's going to have a bro love moment, isn't she? She's going to go, "Hi there, party people."
Yeah, that's it.
Party people.
Party people.
That's it.
Party poppers.
That's it. Party people. Sorry, not party poppers.
There's another outtake there, Michael.
Very good. Okay.